This video is made possible by Second Call Defense. Second Call Defense provides immediate, upfront legal protection for a member who is forced to use any legal weapon for self-defense. So protect yourself today with Second Call Defense. I did. You'll find the link in the description. Hi, I'm Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support of GunGuyTV. I appreciate you a lot. I'm really grateful for you, so please hang in there with me. Before we get started with Sean Maloney, we're going to talk about self-defense and how the Bruen case may have affected that. Not so much carry, but the whole concept of self-defense and what's happening in New York and California and other places. Before we do that, let me remind you to check out these other locations because there are a whole lot of them where the videos are, and YouTube occasionally does delete a video. I'm really trying to get people to sign up on Rumble as much as possible. It seems to be the most popular, but pick the one that you like the best. I'm also whittling down my social media, so that's getting smaller and smaller, as you can see. And you might check out the audio podcast. I'm going to get started again with that next week. I've had a break in it for a while. And then lastly, if you would like to support GunGuyTV, please do it by going to GunGuyTV Crew. You can do that on locals or just go to GunGuyTVCrew.com. Okay, let's go talk to Sean. Hi, Sean. Thank you very much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. We've got lots of questions here I sent you, and then a lot of things have come up since. I think first and foremost, if you can, here's probably how we should start. Because in California in particular, and then in other states, obviously, I think there's 6 of them or 7 of them that have been very restrictive. And now the Supreme Court has essentially said you shall issue, like it or not. There are going to be a lot more people with permits in these states than there ever were before. Now, you and I agree that the Second Amendment is your permit, but nevertheless, in these states, you're going to have one. That still brings up the fact that there's going to be a lot of people carrying who probably don't know the possible consequences of using the firearm and are probably not going to be prepared legally. And that's what you do. So I thought you might touch on that subject real quick. And then we can talk about how it's affected self-defense and what's going on in these various states.
Sure. And thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure. Second Call Defense was specifically designed by attorneys or me to make sure that when you are forced to use lethal force in self-defense, that somebody has your back, that when you make the 911 call, the police are on their way. That 911 call is your first contact with the police to provide training with how to address that call. And then we're there every step of the way for you when the police arrive. If you should be arrested, we provide immediate bail. As soon as the government will let you go, we'll make sure the money's there to get you released. We provide immediate upfront money for a retainer for your attorney. We help you find the best attorney wherever you are located. Oftentimes our members are on vacation and have no idea who to call as far as attorneys. Maybe when you're back home, you know who your attorney is, but he or she's back home and it really doesn't help you. And then we provide the funding throughout the course, throughout your trial, to the end. For trigger to trial, I like to say, we support you and make sure that you have the best services available to you to get you through the often confusing quagmire of laws and what may or may not happen to you.
And I should mention, too, that I've been a member of Second Call Defense for probably, oh, my gosh, a decade or more. Yeah. As long as GunGuyTV has been around, pretty much. And then about a year ago or so, they decided to sponsor the channel. So they're one of my sponsors. So another way that you can support GunGuyTV, oddly enough, is by becoming a member of Second Call Defense. I appreciate them a lot. But as I said, I've been a paying member that entire time. And I can't talk Sean into giving me a free membership. I still have to pay for it. What the heck is going on with that? Well, they got to make a living somehow. Hey, listen, we were talking about a bunch of stuff before we got started. One of those things was, it's kind of a weird question, but we have a right to keep firearms. The Second Amendment says that very plainly. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And the Heller decision, Supreme Court made that very clear. And then in the McDonald decision, they conferred the Second Amendment to the states through the 14th Amendment. And then in the Bruen, the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen case, they also settled the idea that we do have a right to bear. In other words, your right to have a firearm with you does not end at your porch. It does not end at the front of your house. You can take that firearm into public. So we have a right to keep and bear, but nowhere in the Constitution does it say we have a right to self-defense. And so I'm wondering, how does that work? I mean, it's a natural right. I was talking to Chuck Michelle the other day, and he said, well, that's the right that came when we were cavemen. It was the right to have a spear and wave it at the saber-toothed tiger who wanted to come in your cave and eat you. And that's how long we've had that right. But where is it in the law, or is it?
Well, I think in a lot of places it's presumed, but your right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And if you read the articles that were published at that time and what people were concerned about, it was self-defense, defense of others against the Indians at that time, the people that were attacking them at that time, the grizzly bears that were coming in. So if you look at the history that surrounded the Second Amendment and when they drafted that amendment, and what we have to remember is our founding fathers, they wrote incessantly, so they weren't quiet on anything like that. So the history of the Second Amendment is where a lot of that is found. And then you mentioned the Heller decision, which finally stated in plain language that the right to keep and bear arms protected by the Second Amendment is an individual right, and we have a right to keep those firearms in our home for self-defense. And then McDonald, of course, expanded to the states, but Bruen was even more importantly. And I think if you count the number of times that Justice Thomas mentioned self-defense, so that's what I thought was very notable, that the fact that the gun was being used for self-defense even kind of had more play or more concentration on it than our protection against the tyranny of our government. So that was a big change that I saw in that opinion, was that they plainly said that we have a right, that the right to keep and bear arms outside of our home is a constitutional right and one is protected. And we have a right to protect ourselves and to use our firearms for self-defense and defense of others.
You just brought up a great point, and I know it's going to show up in the comments, and people are going to say, well, it's not a right to self-defense, it's a right to fight against tyranny. That's true. Mm-hmm. And that has that, just so that you know, in case you didn't read the decisions, I encourage you to do so. They're really a good read. They're long, but they're really worth reading. That was actually addressed in those decisions as well. So I'm just talking about the self-defense component, because it's fairly common knowledge, and it was in the decisions, that one of the reasons the founders wanted us to be able to be armed is because of their experience with England, and England attempting to disarm them, which is what the whole story of Paul Revere's Ride is about. That whole thing was the redcoats traveling across the country taking arms, and they were just warning the colonists, hide your guns before they get here. So we have a whole history of the colonies being oppressed by the King of England at the time and wanting to disarm them. And so one of the reasons for the Second Amendment is that. But since this decision covered bearing arms in public, then it does follow that we want to make sure that it also covers our ability to defend ourselves. And so that brings up the question. We have this kid. I shouldn't call him a kid, but I'm in my, I'm an old man. So we have this young man who is a hero. Let's face it. And his name, I think, let me look him up here, I think is Elijah Dick. And I hope, Elijah, if you're watching, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Please forgive me if I'm not. But this young gentleman in the mall there in Indiana, it says here, I'm looking at Fox News, which is not always the best, but nevertheless, it says police say it took Elijah Dicken just 15 seconds to neutralize a man who opened fire on shoppers at an Indiana mall. Quick action, they believe, saved countless lives. Now, initially, this young fellow was held up as the hero that he is. And certainly the police department, the local community has held him up that way. Local politicians held him up that way. But now we see the media beating on him, calling him a vigilante. We see the various different anti-gunners and some politicians, their ire and their backs are up now because this guy actually succeeded in stopping a shooting. If he were in a different state, if he were in California or New York, do you think he might be prosecuted at this point for actually defending himself? I'm thinking about that bodega owner who the other day defended himself with a knife. It's a guy younger than me, and he's still elder, and they call him elderly. Okay, 61. He's younger than I am. He defends himself against a criminal, stabs the guy to death, and yet they bring him up on charges of murder. If we have a right to self-defense, how far can states go in trying to chill that right this way?
Well, I think, and it's obvious based on what New York State has said since the Bruen decision, They've already gone out of their way to violate people's rights. They removed the requirement of a proper cause to be issued a concealed handgun permit. And now you have to have good moral character, whatever that means. And then, of course, they have 18 hours of the training, allow states to regulate different parts of it. Some of this is constitutional. A lot of it's going to be unconstitutional. But what was important about the Bruen decision was the sole issue that the court really focused on and really defined the issue before the court was, does prohibiting somebody from exercising their Second Amendment rights outside of the home violate their Second Amendment rights? If I say, nah, Joel, you can't carry out here, does that violate your Second Amendment rights? And plainly, the court stated that it did. And when you look at the fact that the malls are gun-free zones, quote unquote, a gun-free zone, that's generally civil laws. They can determine under the terms of their leases, or usually it's the attorney for the developer that developed the mall decides that there won't be any guns in here. In most cases, and I'm not really aware of where it's not, most of them aren't enforceable by law. I know in the state of Ohio and many other states where I am, if I go in and you have to prove that I intentionally violated your little sign on the door. And there's a lot of things the government can do, but they can't get in my mind and prove my intent. So those are very hard to enforce. And in most places, and I've been contacted by several people, a lot of times the no gun signs are at the office door to the mall management, and they're not anywhere else. And so people are wandering around in the mall armed, and of course, they don't have the intent, or they're not knowingly violating anything.
Well, that gun-free zone didn't work very well anyway, because certainly the guy who walked in to kill people and did kill people ignored the sign, even if he saw it.
And, you talk about the progressives and the liberals out there in the anti-gun crowd, how they're starting to attack them. But you have to remember, that's their modus operandi. They never, no matter what the situation is, they always use it and turn it into their favor. It doesn't matter if you can remember when George Zimmerman never even touched upon stand your ground. Stand your ground wasn't an issue, but the rallying cry after the George Zimmerman trial was, oh, we can't have stand your ground. And Ohio had a stand your ground bill ready to be passed at that point in time. Well, after that after his acquittal and all the noise about stand your ground and we got to get rid of it, all the legislators in Ohio removed that. We just got that finally last year. So they'll use everything at their disposal to turn it into their issue. He's a hero. In 15 seconds, 3 people were dead. And can you imagine what another 15 seconds or 30 seconds would have meant? Or another minute?
If Mr. Dickin had not done what he'd done, can you imagine that? Oh my gosh, how many people were in that mall?
Oh yeah.
This dude would have kept killing people and kept killing people and kept killing people until law enforcement showed up and killed him.
Well, and what was good was the first words I heard law enforcement utter was he was a hero. Thank God for him. Because they realized more than anything else that essentially, they're never going to be there. It's always the good guy or good girl with the gun, because law enforcement can't be there. There's no way. And more often than not, these killers, they're going to make sure law enforcement isn't around. So they go to a gun-free zone.
Well, and even if, first of all, I should state the obvious. It should be obvious. The most casual observers, law enforcement would love to be there on time to stop it, but it's just physically impossible. They can't be everywhere all at once. And these things do not happen where law enforcement is. And then even when law enforcement shows up, sometimes they make mistakes in their decision-making process. We're seeing that with the reports on Uvalde. And that leaves citizens without any help. Even though you got all these guys standing out there with guns, the shooter's still in there shooting people. Right. And so we've gotten in this position now as a country where we've assigned the responsibility for keeping us safe to government agents whom we do not know, who do not know us, and who, other than the fact that their job requires it, have no real vested interest in keeping us safe. I'm not beating up on law enforcement. My father was a police officer. I've worked with law enforcement for years. I was a bail bondsman, a security contractor. And so I'm not beating up on cops. Most of my friends are cops. So if you're taking it that way, please don't. It's a simple fact that being a police officer is not a suicide mission. It's a job. And so when they show up, they're going to make sure that it's safe before they go in the door a lot of the time. And in the meantime, people are being shot. So if armed citizens are already inside, That's the magic medicine for this. That's the magic pill for this. And you would think, just like, who was it, Sheriff Brady Judd, I think is his name in Florida, a reasonable politician, a reasonable law enforcement official would say, when they know that citizens are carrying guns, hey, if you're carrying a gun and you're a law-abiding citizen and you happen to be there and we're not, please, and you can stop it, please do, and you will not be prosecuted. And oh, by the way, we're working on passing a law so that you can't be sued. And then all of a sudden, guess what? These mall shootings, these mass shootings, they would come to a screeching halt because we wouldn't have any more of these gun-free zones. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on any of that. I know in Arizona, I'd get a totally different response if I shot some thug in Navajo or Apache County, Arizona, than I will in San Diego, California. Right. I can tell you that right now.
Absolutely. And it's going to vary from county to county, state to state, depending upon who the prosecutor is, the city manager is, the police chief is. It's all going to change. And it's always been my view that the best first responder is when you're your own first responder, because nobody can be there quicker. You have to be able to protect your life and the life of others in an instant. And I always try to think back, when in this country did we come to believe that 911 would ever protect us, that 911 was the answer? It never was the answer. It's always just calling to have somebody put some crime scene tape on or investigate what always happened, because they can't be there. But it's strange how there's so many people out there that still think, well, when someone starts shooting, I'm going to call 911 and everything's going to be better. It's never worked that way. And I think more and more people are seeing that. With the school shootings, people are seeing that. We need armed teachers. I've been a proponent for armed teachers, been involved with the FASTA program in Ohio and Colorado for years. The quickest way to stop the active killer is with an armed first responder, an armed citizen. And again, this latest mall shooting in Indiana drives the point home. And you would think, to people like you and I and your listeners, we understand what a great thing it was that he was there and he was trained. But at the same time, you have the naysayers and the anti-gun people that will never argue statistics or facts because they're not on their side. They turn it immediately into he is a vigilante because he chose to defend other people's lives.
Well, and I'm of the opinion, I don't care what you call him. You can call him a vigilante. You can call him a hero. You can call him, a young guy with a gun. You can call him whatever you want. Here's the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as the old saying says. Mm-hmm. If he wasn't there, there'd be a lot more people dead. A lot. I mean, the first 15 seconds did not go well for the few people that he killed. And the next 15 seconds were not going to go better. And so in arguing that he's a vigilante and he shouldn't have been there and there was a sign and all this other crap, the progressive anti-gun folks are arguing that more people should have died at the hands of the killer who walked in the place. That they should have waited for some government official to come and stand outside for a while and figure out which door to go in and where the guy might be and spend an hour fussing around before they went in and stopped this guy. And in that hour, how many 15-second periods are there in an hour? I can't do the math in my head, but that's a heck of a lot of deaths. And so the argument is the honest citizen shouldn't have done anything. He shouldn't have been there. He had no right to have a gun. They should have just let that killer go on and just murder people for an hour or so. This is the idiocy and the insanity of the whole mindset of those people.
Joe, that's always the other half of their argument is think about what you're proponents of. You're proponents of more people dying because you just don't believe that someone should have the ability or the right to protect their own life when nobody else is there to do it. I mean, it's a God-given right because you know what? We all have the right to live and to live our life. And, and that's one thing that needs to be pointed out over and over again. They don't have the facts and statistics on their side, but they'll argue for more death and for more carnage and for more bodies, just so they can scream louder. Maybe they don't like the fact that the killing was stopped so soon because they didn't get the proper press out of it now with only 3 people dead and a good guy killing a bad guy.
I don't think there's a maybe. I think that's exactly the problem. And I've said this before, and I'll probably get in trouble saying it again, but it is my humble opinion that these people do not care about the lives of the people in the mall. What they care about is whether they can use the event for political gain. And if they can't use it for political gain, their heads explode. And so in this one, they can't use it for political gain because a young man named Elijah Dicken, I'm really hoping I'm not screwing up his name, was brave enough to take the pistol he was carrying and take on this shooter and stop it. And I'd love to shake the kid's hand. Well done. You know, in California, they want to, I don't know what's going on in New York because I haven't enough trying to keep track of California, honestly, but California is trying to pass a bill to do a whole bunch of things. You mentioned the whole gun-free zone sign thing. Currently in California, all that is, they'd have to prove that you saw it and walked in anyway. Right. And then once you're notified, it's just trespassing. It's 602 PC. If you stay, then you have a trespassing issue. If you leave, then there isn't one, because it's basically now you know, oh, I'm terribly sorry. Of course, I'll go to a different store or whatever the case might be. And then postings have to be open and notorious. And depending on the municipality, it have to be a certain size and a certain shape and have a certain image and all that other crap. Well, now California is trying to make the law so that it's an affirmative choice to allow guns in the business. And so unless you walk up to a business and you see a sign that says, yes, guns are welcome here, then by default, they're not welcome anywhere. And so they're essentially trying to turn the entire state of California into a gun-free zone. And this brings up an interesting question from the standpoint of somebody who has a permit. So now you have a permit. I've had a permit in California for 30 years or more. And pretty much it's been a very valuable permit because I can go just about any place with some exceptions. Now, all of a sudden, I have all these gun-free zones and sensitive places, if this law passes, that I may, it's very easy to inadvertently step on the wrong sidewalk, walk down the wrong street, get in the wrong parking lot or whatever, and suddenly I'm in a sensitive place. What happens if I'm like this young man and I end up shooting and killing a criminal in a sensitive place, and now I call second call defense, help me, help me, help me. Do you guys still come and help me even though I'm now in a sensitive place?
Well, you know what? There's some organizations out there that will not provide assistance to members that essentially have broken the law, whether it's civil violation or a criminal violation, because they're in a quote unquote sensitive place or they didn't see a sign. But we've never been like that. I look at one thing and one thing only, and that's the reasonable proper use of a firearm or any weapon in self-defense. And if you did what you had a legal right to do, defending your lives or the lives of innocent bystanders, then that's where it begins and ends for us. I don't care what happened. I mean, we've represented a gentleman from California who was also charged because he was in an area where he couldn't possess hollow point ammunition. Well, he had a lot of little crimes, but then they charged him with murder for defending themselves, and of course he was acquitted of that. But nothing else really matters. We're going to look at the fact, Joel, where you were, did you properly use your firearm in self-defense? And it begins and ends there, and then we move forward.
You know, and that's for California in particular, and I assume that New York and other heavily restricted jurisdictions. That's extremely important because Chuck Michel over at Michel and Associates and the California Rifle and Pistol Association publish a book every year on California gun laws. And every year it gets bigger and bigger.
I can't imagine trying to do that.
I have a feeling pretty soon it's going to be, well, he's not doing it himself. He's got a whole law firm that kind of keeps going through it every year and publishing an update every year. And I think the thing's going to look like the New York phone book pretty soon, which means now you're the guy or gal who has a concealed carry permit and you're supposed to know all that. I'm going to tell you right now, like I said, a lot of my friends are cops. The cops don't know all those laws because it's not possible. In fact, if you contact the Department of Justice Firearms Division and ask them a question, half the time they don't know what the law says. So it's important that you have somebody somewhere who can get in there, because if it goes wrong, you're going to be, what do they say? Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Well, the book is this thick, right? And then the way they're trying to craft this, you could step on a sensitive place without any problem at all. Well, how do you feel this New York case? How does it affect self-defense in the majority of the country? It would seem to me the majority of the country probably didn't change very much.
In my view, this makes a huge difference. It's going to level the playing field, really, and completely change the playing field because now in your situation, what you're talking about, California, essentially everywhere is a sensitive place and everywhere is posted and you can't carry anywhere. So the intent and the main issue before that court was, is it a violation of Joel's Second Amendment rights to have laws out there so that he can't exercise those rights outside of the home? And that court determined, yes, if they keep you from exercising your Second Amendment rights or carrying a firearm or whatever weapon you choose outside of the home, then they're violating your civil rights. And so I think that's why probably New Jersey and Maryland changed almost immediately to shell issues. And eventually, unfortunately, it'll take lawsuits to get there. But eventually, I think the true meaning of the court's decision is going to come out. If it's, our constitutional rights are borderless. They don't stop at the state line. I carry that Constitution in my breast pocket wherever I go. And I'm protected by that Constitution. And now, especially with the court's holding and Thomas's holding in this case, they specifically said I have a right to keep and bear arms outside of my home for my own self-defense. So these states like California and New York State that are going to try to quell that activity, they're going to have a hard road to hoe, I would think. And it's just how does a court enforce that now? And what happens? I know from what I was reading about the California, all their changes in the laws, there's a lot of sheriffs that have already come out and said, you know what? We're not going to follow what the governor's saying. We're going to still issue permits, and we're going to issue them properly. And, and we're not going to have the proper cause requirement in it. So you have the sheriffs, which are really the true government officials. They're all coming out in California saying, or in New York State saying, this is the way we're going to enforce it according to what the Supreme Court says. But you also know that the governor and the mayors are already saying that they're not going to abide by it.
Well, I know where I live, our mayor is extremely conservative, and so is and pro-gun, and so is our city council, police chief. The sheriff has just changed. Our previous sheriff, Bill Gore, was not the most pro-gun, but at the same time, he was actually issuing more and more permits. He wasn't quite shall issue, but now they are, because the attorney general here did send out a letter to almost immediately to all the sheriffs saying you can no longer require good cause. But don't forget about that good moral character, that being a good person thing. You might want to get 365 letters from people they know and make sure that they have a psych eval, and you make sure that they have, this is all this stuff that they're trying to do. I agree with you. I think over time, it's going to take lawsuits, and it's going to take, and boy, nobody's going to like me saying this, it's going to take lawsuits, and it's going to take 8 to 10 years for all of this stuff to flesh out. I think some of it will flesh out faster than others. Certainly the sensitive place thing is going to get tossed quicker when they want to make it, because Justice Thomas used you can't make all of Times Square a sensitive place. And so,
because they're more populated.
Right.
Yeah. And he did a great job, I thought, of addressing everything with plain language and coming right out and saying it. It's interesting because when you read most Supreme Court opinions that majority of them I've read, there's always that little bit of secrecy there. Like, what are they trying to say? What do they mean? What's he saying? And I guess that's where lawsuits come from. But he used pretty plain language and was pretty direct on everything he stated. And he addressed a lot of things that you and I had always talked about, but that weren't even up for review. But he addressed them in his opinion. So there's no doubt where he stands on the Second Amendment, on everything he said about citizens having a right to carry firearms and protect themselves outside of the home.
Well, and I think he used phrases which I think I'm not an attorney, so you tell me, but he used phrases that I think have a meaning to them. One of the things he talked about was early on in the opinion, and I forget exactly what he was dealing with, but he was dealing with the approach to trying Second Amendment cases, that you could no longer use the means in balancing tests of rational basis, intermediate scrutiny, and strict scrutiny. And in case you haven't watched the show enough that you know what that is, the lower the scrutiny, the more government laws stand up and are found to be constitutional, and the higher the scrutiny, the more of them fall. Well, as a result, the courts, a lot of them, particularly at the Ninth Circuit and in states like California, New York, and so on, had tried to use this rational basis thing as much as possible, so the government could simply say, well, it's public safety,
Right,
and they would say, okay, well, the government has an interest in it, so that's rational basis, that's constitutional. That went out the door. The other thing that went out the door was the idea that it was up to the citizen to prove that the law was unconstitutional rather than the government to prove that it's constitutional. Right. So that burden is now on the government. So there's a couple of major changes there. He was going through the manner in which these are decided, and I'll paraphrase because I don't have it in front of me. But he said it's basically a two-step test. One, the first step is, does the plain language of the amendment, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed? Does the plain language of the amendment cover the conduct in question? And if it does, then the conduct is presumptively constitutional. Now it's up to the government to prove that whatever law they're passing meets the next standard. If the government wants to pursue it anyway, even though it's presumptively constitutional, then they have to look at the history and tradition of the country around the time of the ratification of the Bill of Rights, which was 1791, and around the time of the ratification of the 14th Amendment, which was just, a very few decades later, and what kinds of laws and restrictions would have been tolerated by the founders at the time. And in order to do that, they have to find some sort of analog. They have to find a law back then which is similar to the law they want to pass. And if they can't do that, then the law becomes unconstitutional. And when he wrote that, he used the term unqualified command. He said, if they cannot do that, then they cannot pass a law that infringes upon the Second Amendment's unqualified command. And I loved that term. And I don't know if that's a term of art or whether it's a legal term, but the idea of a command to me, and this is what I'm curious about your view, is a command to me is not a request. It's a command. You will obey it. And then an unqualified command is a command that does not have any qualifiers to it. It is what it is. It says what it says. It means what it says. The right of the people to keep and bear arms, and here's the command, shall not be infringed. That is an unqualified command. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you 100%. When he used the language, he did it for a purpose, and the command shall not be infringed was very direct. And for years, people tend to forget the operative definition of shall and what was going on. But you're right. An unqualified command, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Give me an example of how our founding fathers around that same time were modifying or changing or infringing upon that, and they held it to be proper, then we'll talk about it in today's day and age. And there's very few cases where you're going to find that, because truly the Second Amendment, it unqualified commands shall not be infringed. Very few words. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's one of the reasons I do love the Bill of Rights. The original 10 amendments are extremely clear, and they're written in plain English, and anybody with a fourth grade education can read them.
Leave it to the liberals and the progressives and the anti-gun people to cast so much confusion over the years as, what does that mean? Well, what do you mean, what does it mean? And that was amazing. It's how it took Heller to say, hey, wait a minute, we have an individual right to keep and bear arms on the Second Amendment. And it took Bruen to say, hey, wait a minute, we have an individual right to keep and bear arms outside of the home for our own protection or any legitimate purpose.
Well, the idea that the Constitution is a living document is absurd. It's not. It meant what it meant when it was written, and that's what it means. And that's where the court is going back to. It's what I described earlier. I think everybody just calls originalism. You're looking at the text, and then beyond the text, you're looking at the history and the tradition at the time of the founding and at the time of the adoption of the law. And if you cannot find an analog, then whatever you're trying to do now wouldn't have been tolerated then, it isn't tolerable now. An example of that would be the kinds of weapons that have been, you think about, the Henry Yellow Boy, load on Sunday and shoot all week was the sales mantra for that, because it held so much ammunition. That was the AR-15 of its time. And yet it was not even imagined that anyone would try to ban that. And yet it was this incredibly effective tool. And yet, you went from basically a Sharps rifle, something that was a single shot, to something that could hold a number of rounds. And the idea that you could load on Sunday and shoot all week, it's kind of impressive. And that's where the Winchester 94 came from, and so on. Those guns were the AR-15s of their time. They just weren't as modular. And so when you look at the AR-15 now, or you look at the gun now that holds more than 10 rounds, which California and New York and other states want to do, that's an absurd restriction that cannot be supported by history. Wouldn't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think if you've ever been to the Firearms Museum or the NRA Firearms Museum, you go back to the point in time when the Second Amendment, was just freshly printed. But even within a decade of that, you see all the firearms that were made that with cylinders with the ability, even muzzle loaders, to fire in quick succession. So it's not unmanageable that an AR-15 or a semi-automatic rifle or handgun would be there. And what's interesting, there was the California opinion from the district court that said that magazine capacity or magazines are protected by the Second Amendment. And of course, the Court of Appeals said, no, they're not. So it'll be interesting to see what happens now because of that. Because truthfully, what is the limit, and how can you go back and find a law that infringes upon something as basic as magazine capacity or the ability to load your firearm with as much ammunition as you would want? How do you make that constitutional? I don't think you can anymore. So like I said, I think piece by piece, state by state, lawsuit by lawsuit, and then when enough people lose, they won't want to waste taxpayers' money anymore, or the people won't tolerate them wasting taxpayers' money, because there's so many firearms owners out there. Certainly after the last 2 or 3 years, and with COVID, all of the concealed carry permits that have been issued, how many women are carrying firearms now? The numbers aren't on their side anymore. Again, they seem to make the most noise and scream the loudest, and so the squeaky wheel gets the oil. But there's not a whole lot of people out there, if you look at the percentage of people that aren't familiar with firearms or don't own firearms. 400 million firearms in America, more than one firearm for every man, woman, and child.
Oh yeah, and people own many. I mean, I hunt as you do, and I have guns for self-defense and for target shooting and so on. And so people have, and I have guns in California, I have guns in Arizona because I'm a resident of both states. It's an interesting thought to, to consider how the restrictions in these states may fall, because some of those things, you mentioned the magazine case, that was Judge Benitez, somebody we call Saint Benitez in the state of California because we love Judge Benitez. Judge Benitez, I'm pretty sure, is of Cuban descent. Excuse me. And he experienced oppression directly. And so when these cases came before him, he understood the value of the Second Amendment, the First Amendment, and the Constitution. And he actually drafted these cases and did the historical analysis in such a way that they're going to be hard to refute. Although he did it differently than what Justice Thomas requires, the information is still there. So it's going to be interesting. Those are sitting at the Ninth Circuit, some of them. Some of them, as you know, were GVR'd, granted review and vacated and remanded back down to the Ninth Circuit, some of them to other circuits. But a lot of those cases for California already have been argued. They've been briefed. They're sitting at the court. And so they're not starting at square one. Certain of them are going to start at square one, obviously. These crazy restrictions they'll put on concealed carry that they're trying to do are going to end up in court about 5 minutes after they go in effect. There you go. But a lot of them should be decided pretty quickly. The magazine ban should go fairly quickly because it's sitting at the court already, hopefully. The assault weapons ban, there's an assault weapons ban case here in California. There's an ammo ban case, California, already briefed and ready to go. And it's already sitting at the court. There's the roster case. All these California restrictions, the vast majority of them have already been litigated, and they're either sitting at the Ninth Circuit because the Ninth Circuit held them waiting for this decision in Bruen, or they went to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court had them held, and then they granted cert, vacated them, and sent them back. So those should move fairly quickly in the sense that they won't take 5, 6, 7 years to decide. Whereas when you're starting from scratch, some of them do. And I wonder if that's not the case in New York and other states like that. But I don't know. Do you have a view into that?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of cases like that that are out there. I mean, you and I, over the years, we'd look at cases and think, why didn't the Supreme Court take that? Why didn't they take that? So, I mean, they knew it was in the pipeline, and something was better out there for it. But I think that now that all these cases have been litigated, these cases are sitting and have been filed, now you simply apply the current case law to it. And I think a lot of these cases, there's motions for summary judgments being drafted right now by the law firms and attorneys that says essentially there's no genuine issue, material fact at issue anymore. So we win. And they write these motions for summary judgment based on the current case law issued by the Supreme Court in Bruen. And these cases are quickly going to be disposed of. Of course, a lot of them will be on a court-by-court, judge-by-judge basis. But when you're looking at the federal court system, it should be pretty clear. The highest court of the land, these cases have been litigated up to a certain point. They're sitting there. Well, now based on this new case law and this new holding by the Supreme Court of the United States, you lose and we win. And it should go in a lot of cases that quickly.
Yeah, should being the operative word. Obviously, there are activist judges out there who legislate from the bench. So there's going to be some screwy decisions, and we're not going to win them all, and then we'll win them. But there's some that are going to drag on longer than others. I'm curious. I know there are states, for example, we talked about self-defense. And now with Bruen, it's hard to argue that we don't have a natural right to self-defense if it's been mentioned 37 times in a Supreme Court decision, or how many times. Right. And if the whole purpose of having the firearm when you walk out your door is to be ready and able to defend yourself against an attack, how does that affect companies like yours, where certain states have said you can't sell that here because it's murder insurance?
Well, and I was talking with one of my partners earlier about that. What they've used is the SEC or insurance regulations to keep us out. And I believe if someone is going to take, of course, a lawsuit against one of these states that says you can't sell that here, to wait a minute, if I have the God-given right and ability to carry a firearm for self-defense, specifically outside of my home, then how can it be constitutional that you tell me that I can't protect myself during the legal system dealing with my use of a firearm for self-defense? How can that be constitutional? So it'll be interesting. It's an interesting question that we've been talking about, but these states come up with their insurance regulations like New York State did and Washington did to ban that. And I just recently saw that there's an anti-gun group trying to pass a referendum in Oregon banning high-capacity magazines, or just about all magazines. So we'll see how that happens, because I don't care how many people vote on a referendum to change their laws. If their law is unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional no matter who does it. So kind of a waste of time, I was thinking.
Yeah, we don't live in a democracy. People think we live in a democracy, and we don't. A pure democracy is the rule of the majority, even if it's one more than everybody else. We live in a constitutional representative republic. It's a whole different animal. Mm-hmm. So you can vote in a law if you want, but if it's unconstitutional, it's unconstitutional. And that's why it's called a constitutional representative republic. The foundation of our country is the United States Constitution, which is why these folks, I think, want to destroy it. You brought up something interesting. I was talking to one of the attorneys I think it was for CRPA, it might have been Chuck Michel, the other day, and he was talking about the natural progression of these lawsuits, so that some of them are more important to hit first and some of them will be hit later. And one of the people at the meeting asked him about the whole idea that, okay, our rights, we have a right to keep arms in our home. We've now decided with Bruen that our right does not end at our doorstep. We have a right to carry a firearm, bear a weapon, not just a firearm, a knife or whatever, in public. And now we need a decision that says that our right does not end at the border of our state. Because in this, I was starting to dig them out, and I made a little noise in the background. I was going to pull out all my 50 million permits I have here so that I can actually travel around the country and still carry as I go from state to state to state, because I do travel a lot. And it's absurd. It should, first of all, the whole country should be constitutional carry, but it's not. But if it's not going to be initially, then a permit should be valuable and useful everywhere. And at the moment, it's not. How do you see that changing, or do you?
I thought, based on the language, some dicta and some direct rulings of Bruen, that that national reciprocity is going to happen much sooner than later, because how can it doesn't stop? The Constitution is borderless, so it's not going to stop in New York State. And it's going to be interesting, but things are going to have to change, because I have that right. And if I have the right in Washington, D.C., I have the right in Pennsylvania, I have the right in Maryland, I have the right in California. It's a constitutional right. And granted, the magazine bans and the training and the sensitive areas, those are all restrictions on the right. And I always say, gun control isn't necessarily someone coming into my house and grabbing my guns. You don't have to seize my guns. It could be one more fee, one more piece of paper, one more hurdle for me to jump until finally I say, you know what, it's not worth it. You make it so difficult to carry a firearm in California with all your sensitive areas now. How many people are going to say, Jesus, I'm just going to leave my gun at home? It's not worth it. And I think that's what a lot of these laws intend to do. But people should take heart with this decision, because I truly believe that that's going to open up concealed carry throughout the country. And I'm interested to hear the arguments against that based on the Bruen decision.
Well, and I would agree. And if you're watching this right now, and regardless of the state you're in, if you're in any of those restrictive states, whether it's Hawaii, California, New York, I don't care, go apply for a permit. Mm-hmm. California just doxed everybody that had a permit. And I'm of the opinion, in my personal opinion, they did it intentionally. And I say that not just from an emotional perspective, but having talked to a couple of software engineers and web designers who said, no, there's no way they did that accidentally. And so I think they did that intentionally based upon that. I think that'll come out at some point or other. We'll find that out, hopefully, because there is an independent investigation going on of that in the DOJ, where the DOJ is not investigating itself. The sheriffs, all 58 of them in this state, were not going to put up with that. And so they went after Attorney General Bonta and the DOJ over it, and the pressure of the sheriffs has caused them to have an independent investigation. But the point is that, Sean, you're exactly right. The whole reason for doing that was to try to scare people from getting a permit. Mm-hmm. Well, a couple things I want you to consider if you're thinking about applying for a permit. One, that list is already out there. It's not likely to happen again, although it could. Right. And you weren't on it. So go ahead and go get your permit, first of all. Secondly, we need you to go apply for a permit, because we need to understand whether the process is now within the decision of Bruen. If the sheriffs are doing something, or the state of New York or whatever is chilling your right through procedural nonsense and red tape and whatever, the only way we're going to find out exactly how that works is if you go apply for a permit. And then all of a sudden, now you have somebody whose right has been violated, and we're going to find ourselves in court to fix that. So that's extremely important. The other thing is, you can't let them scare you out of having a gun. All right, here's the last part. I was doxxed. I spend quite a bit of money to keep my property addresses off the internet, because I'm kind of a public person in a minor sort of way, and somebody could get mad at me or whatever. The guy they doxed carries a gun. The guy that they doxed has guns at home. I work from home. Showing up at my house trying to force your way in my house is a career cul-de-sac for any criminal. It's not going to go well. So at least the people they dox have the ability to defend themselves. So I would urge you, go get a permit. Don't let this scare you out of it. Don't let them manipulate you. Go and get a permit. Go and apply with your local sheriff, even if it takes a long time. If it takes a long time, guess what that is? That's another lawsuit, right? I mean, it may take 10, it may take 100. Who knows?
And we need people out there applying for permits in their states to show, number one, that there's a lot of us out there. And number two, you got to find out, like you said, if the system's working. And if it's not, there's no better way to tee up the next lawsuit than having somebody with their constitutional rights quelled or purely ignored.
I'm curious about another thing, and that is you travel around quite a bit in these other states. How are you seeing what are you seeing the thinking process is in states that are already free? The reason why I asked the question is because I've had people say to me, well, it doesn't affect me. I'm in Arizona a lot. And, it doesn't affect me because we're a constitutional carry state. We're a Second Amendment sanctuary state. Yeah, but I think that got there politically. It can go away politically because California, in my memory, was a very reliably red, very conservative state, and now it's very reliably deep blue. So these things can change. Are you seeing people come to that realization, or?
I think I have talked to a number of people that have come to that realization because a lot of things have been going on in the country, and particularly with the Supreme Court this year, and they realized, I think, probably more so than ever before from the transition from Trump to Biden, that wait a minute, elections do have consequences. Wait a minute, if this isn't a conservative, right-thinking Supreme Court, can you imagine what would have came out? And I think that's more important that people realize now that their votes do matter. Number one, number two, that just because I'm in that safe state doesn't mean I can't keep pushing and I can't keep writing letters and I can't keep traveling to other states that are a little bit more difficult to carry in. Because you know what? One election we're looking at. What if Donald Trump never existed and we didn't get those appointments to the Supreme Court? I mean, all what we're talking about right now, it goes away. It doesn't exist. So this conversation, we never even would imagine having. Right.
Well, and as you said, if we didn't have a court that was right thinking, that was correctly thinking and looking at the Constitution as saying what it means and meaning what it says, and the history being important, we have a great court right now, but Justice Thomas is not getting any younger.
No.
We have a couple of justices there not getting any younger. And so that's why the election in 2022 is very important, because you want America First, Second Amendment supporting, constitutional supporting senators to overturn the majority in that Senate so that Biden can't put justices on the court in case somebody dies. We lost Justice Scalia in a shocking, unexpected sort of way, and that could happen. And then in 2024, if we get a retread of somebody like Biden, well, certainly those justices are getting older. One of them is going to be retiring within that space of time or pass away. And now we're back to a liberal court. Can the court, if it swings the other direction, kind of unscrew the progress we've made in cases like Heller and McDonald and Bruen?
To a certain extent, they can. I mean, nothing is ever well settled, or never is 100% settled. Things can change. There can always be a little bit different issues. They can always put carve-outs and things. And I want you to realize too, there's another case that didn't get a lot of talk, and I'm sure you heard about it. It was a case dealing with the regulations that were put out by the EPA.
West Virginia versus EPA, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And we say, wait a minute, you don't have unfettered authority to change the rules or regulations and decide what's legal, what's permitted, and what's not. And so now that carries over to what the ATF has been trying to do. I don't know where the ATF thinks they got their authority to redefine machine gun, to redefine the arm braces, and to make decisions that certainly are decisions that started with Congress. You don't act on their behalf. We didn't elect you. So I think that'll slow some things down within the ATF, certainly with what they've been trying to do. Now, of course, you have the rear breed trigger, the binary trigger systems. The ATF put an interesting letter out to all its FFLs saying, hey, if you have any of these rare breed triggers, you better give them to us, or you shouldn't have any. And we're going to fine you $10,000, and you can serve time in jail if you have any in your store. But they haven't went door to door, and they haven't gotten a list of the people that have these rare breed triggers. But it was interesting how they're telling the FFLs, you can't sell them, you can't have them, and if you do, you better turn them in. What about all the thousands that have been sold?
What's interesting is if you know the definition of a machine gun, these do not fit the definition of a machine gun.
And there's no
as the definition.
Mechanically,
I don't care how you look at it.
Exactly. But and everybody's getting worried. And so, wait a minute, it either is a machine gun or it's not. There's no gray area, not with the mechanics of the definition of a machine gun. Now, also, they're trying to change their own definition of a firearm because several cases, and one which I was involved with, came to the conclusion, you know what your AR-15 doesn't do? It doesn't fit the definition of a firearm that you came out with. And so, and it started out in California, there's a lot of lower receivers that were determined to be guns. And I said, wait a minute, your definition of firearm in an AR-15 with an upper and a lower, it doesn't fit. And so a lot of those cases were thrown out quietly or dismissed, or the ATF or the federal prosecutor didn't bring those cases. So that's why you're seeing a redefinition of what a firearm is. And again, they're trying to do that. But again, where is it? Why are they allowed to make this new definition?
Well, I think the court just said you're not.
Right, right.
You know, and gun owners have been arguing that point for a long time. Right. The ATF cannot make laws. Well, exactly. Technically, that's true. What they can do is make rules, and those rules have the force and effect of law if they get through the rulemaking process. But now with this case against EPA, the court essentially said, oh, no, you've overstepped your authority. You cannot make rules outside the framework and outside the lines. You're coloring outside the lines. You can't color outside the lines of the specific law that the Congress passed. And if you do, that's not happening. Now, I suspect that these agencies are going to continue doing it, and we're going to have a lot of lawsuits over it. But I agree.
What's interesting is you're going to find out. We got to remember that bump stocks are still in the federal court system. That's not over with yet. So the bump stocks,
and by the way, they're not machine guns either. No, if you look at the definition, they're not machine guns either.
But right now you're using the definition of machine gun, and now you're looking at what the ATF decided, needed to be banned. So that'll be interesting too. And I think that it was funny. I'm not sure what it was like in California, but in my region, for the ATF, the different states that the ATF in this region covers, there was no bump stocks turned in, none. And it always makes me laugh because I tell people I had more bump stocks turned into me than the ATF had turned into them.
Well, I think the same is going to happen if the federal government tries to ban AR-15s.
Right.
Because there's a bazillion of them out there. Secondly, many have been made out of what everybody calls an 80% lower, so there's no record of them. And then many have been sold from John to his buddy Bill in private sales in states where it's legal to do that, and no bill of sale is really required. It's suggested, but it's not required. So those are gone. Many of them have been purchased by family members and given to a different family member. Those are gone. It's impossible to trace those. And Dan O'Kelly, who's the retired ATF guy that comes to my show all the time, will tell you that it's impossible to trace those. The trace only takes you to the firearm, from the manufacturer to the gun shop where it was originally shipped to the first purchaser if it was purchased through an FFL. And beyond that, that gun is gone. And so if people just don't turn them in, banning them is impossible. And it's not, they don't have enough cops who would be willing to go door to door to try to seize them. And I've talked to a lot of cops. Nobody wants that job. Can you imagine?
I was just going to say that, Joel.
Yeah. Who wants to go knocking on doors saying, I'm going to take your gun? Eventually, you're not going to go home that night. I mean, nobody wants that job. They're like, no, screw that. It's like I said, it's not a suicide mission, okay? Forget about it. They're better armed than we are. I'm not knocking on that door, right? So that's crazy. Well, like, Sean, we're almost out of time. I wanted to ask you very quickly, if somebody, first of all, I think second, in my humble opinion, and not because you support the channel, but because I've been a member for a long time, and I have also in the past been members of other companies or groups that do what you do. And I think second call defense is the best one. But I would like you to very quickly just tell us how can they sign up, and then what separates you and your company from the others, and the reasons why somebody should choose second call defense as opposed to another company.
Well, quite frankly, we have always 100% of the time offered our member benefits up front. There was never any waiting for an acquittal or reimbursement after the fact. We're there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for you at a moment's notice. As soon as they make the telephone call, Very easy to sign up with. Our sign up page has gotten easier. www.secondcalldefense.org. Plans and pricing. Sign up. Use GunGuy, GunGuyTV, Joel, anything close to his name and a referral code. And because of you got it from Joel, we will give you your first month free. We want you to try it out. Look at our members only section of our websites, our blogs, our videos, our white papers, our training, and then the ability to call me at all times. My cell phone number is 513-484-0142. I always offer that to anybody. You have a question anywhere, call me. Understand that I'm only licensed to practice in a few states. I can give you general legal information in most cases, and I can always point you in the right direction. But understand that Second Call Defense was created because we're in this together, and I knew there had to be a better way to protect the people that were forced to use their firearms in self-defense. And now we cover any other weapon in self-defense also.
Yeah, any other weapon. Bag of squirrels, you once used that as an example. Bag of frozen squirrels. You got to defend yourself with a bag of frozen squirrels. They're going to defend you.
And I've been asked several times, what about my car? Well, I can think of many situations that you're in where your car is going to become your weapon of choice, and it's going to save your life. And so, yes, any weapon, and that includes if it ends up being your automobile or the frozen bag of squirrels.
By the way, you mentioned a couple of things, one of which was the idea of reimbursement rather than getting involved up front. And I don't think I'd heard that from you before. So what exactly are you referring to?
There's some organizations out there and some membership organizations out there that provide their benefits on a reimbursement basis, meaning the first money out of your pocket is your own. And then upon acquittal, no bill by the grand jury, or the charges being dismissed, then they'll pay you back. And that's the general insurance policy form of it, because an insurance company can't provide benefits to somebody who's a defendant in a criminal proceeding. So the old NRA's program, for instance, and one of the ones they have right now, at the end of everything, if you're acquitted, you'll be reimbursed. But that's why when we started, the only way we were going to go online with Second Call Defense is if we could provide our member benefits and services and money provided immediately. Because other than that, it wasn't worth anything. Because if I had the money to pay for everything up front, then I wouldn't need my money or Second Call Defense money. And I always tell people, well, I have $10,000 in the bank if I ever need to bail myself out. And I said, well, that's great, but you lose that $10,000, you never get it back. And why not use my $10,000? Why use your own? And so there's a lot of reasons to be a member of Second Call Defense. We have an impeccable record. We've represented a lot of people, and I'm proud to say we've represented everybody zealously, and the people that we've contacted to represent our members have represented them zealously, and we've had great results.
You mentioned a big word, if. They'll reimburse your money if you're acquitted. Sometimes that's look, guilty people get convicted, and the prisons have a lot of innocent people who got convicted sitting in them as well. Right. So you're saying that Second Call Defense is going to step in there and take care of it at the outset, not wait until it's decided whether you have been acquitted or convicted. And then if you've been convicted, some of these services will not reimburse the money that you spent. For example, I want to make sure I understand. So if I defend myself and I'm using some of these other services, then I need a lawyer. I need to be bailed out. I need all this stuff. I got to front that money. And then only after the court case is resolved, after I've sold my house and I don't have a bunch of stuff and whatever, if I'm acquitted, I'm found not guilty, then they're going to reimburse me. But if I'm found guilty, all that money's gone. Is that what you're describing?
Yeah, that's correct. And there's programs out there, and I'll never name any other programs, but there's programs out there that if you're charged with manslaughter because you use your firearm in self-defense and you pled to disorderly conduct, well, you pled guilty to something, so you don't get your money back. Or you're charged with 7 or 8 different things. I had a gentleman in California that we represented. He was charged with murder, acquitted on that. Was acquitted on everything dealing with his firearm, but he got convicted of having the wrong kind of ammunition in the jurisdiction he was in, and that's something that's kind of unique to California and a few other states also. But because he was convicted of that, most insurance companies or most of the other companies wouldn't provide coverage because you were convicted of something. And just like we talked about earlier, if you're in a no gun zone with a firearm and you're forced to use your firearm in self-defense, I'm not looking at what sign you violated. I'm looking, did Joel properly and reasonably use a firearm in self-defense? And did he have and that's what we're looking at, not whether, wait a minute, you ignored that sign and went in. You know, we're not looking at the mall shooter that way. You know, so, wait a minute, you're a vigilante for using your firearm when you shouldn't have been. So the first thing we're going to do is always provide services to our members. I'm sorry,
say it again because I interrupted you. I didn't realize that. Go ahead.
I said the first thing we're going to do, we're always going to provide services immediately to our members. I tell everybody that everybody has a right to bail. Everybody has a right to representation. And when we're still sorting everything out, we don't even know what happened. But the fact that you're a second call defense member, you're going to get our services, our 24-hour hotline. You're going to have immediate bail money. You're going to have immediate retainer fee. For your
one of the reasons this is super valuable in states like California. In California, it's a number of defense attorneys have told me that it's common to get arrested for brandishing, which is 417 PC in this state, because you drew your firearm. You didn't fire, but you felt threatened. Maybe you're being approached by more than one person. Maybe they're bigger, stronger than you. Maybe they've got a knife or whatever, but you drew the firearm. They ran away. You didn't fire, but now you're getting arrested for brandishing a weapon just because you happen to be in a state that doesn't like you to be able to carry and doesn't want you to do that. Is that something that you've seen here or in other states?
What's interesting is the very first case I defended was a gentleman out of Kentucky that was accused of brandishing. We representing him. Now, he never brandished. He was accused of brandishing. And he said up front, I said, hey, I didn't brandish, but we covered him anyhow. And probably one of the biggest cases that we take are brandishing. We've had brandishing cases in California. We've had brandishing cases almost, it seems like, in every state. But more often than not, I instruct when you brandish and the bad guy runs away, the first thing you do is you call the police and report the fact that you were forced to use a firearm in self-defense, because when you touch that firearm, you mention that firearm, you're in fact using that firearm in self-defense. And so we've represented many, many people who brandish. And I can't tell you, and we'll never know, how many lives are saved in America every day because someone brandished a firearm. Probably the most unreported incident that we have in the United States. Because think about it. Joe, you're walking across a parking lot, you're attacked, you pull your firearm, you're ready to use it, he runs away, they're gone. Oof, that was close. A lot of people don't even think about calling the police and telling them what happened. But I also had a client that the true bad guy decided that he'd make the first call to the police department and blame everything on my client. Well, eventually, since everything was on film, it was all thrown out, and the true bad guy was arrested. But if my client at that time would have been the first person to call or go to the police department, he never even would have been arrested.
That's all I have to say about that. All right. Last thing, you mentioned the fact that you personally are only licensed in a few states, but that does not limit second call defense. You're not licensed in California, for example, but that doesn't limit your ability to defend people in California as an organization.
Not at all. Wherever the incident takes place. And I always tell people, if you're in your own state and you know who you want to represent you, we don't force you to use any attorney. You use the attorney you want. The attorney-client relationship and privilege is yours and yours alone. But if something happens in California, I have a database, I have phone calls, I have people to contact, and I will find you the best criminal defense attorney in the area where you use your firearm. I'll give you a list of 3, sometimes 2. Sometimes I choose your attorney because you're in jail and you can't choose your attorney, but you're free to fire that attorney and get your own when you get out. But we provide coverage in all 50 states. And even though you're not allowed to buy it in New York State, if you use your firearm properly in self-defense in New York State, because you're there, we still represent you in New York State.
Okay, I do travel to Washington, for example, periodically, and the state of Washington, I think, does not allow you to sell it there, do they?
No,
but I have it because I'm in California. I'm a California resident, and I'm an Arizona resident. So if I'm in Washington and I have coverage, and God forbid I have to defend myself, you're still going to defend me in the state of Washington, even though they won't let you sell it there.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. So That's why I can still say we have coverage in all 50 states, because even though you may not be able to buy it there, if you're not a resident and you're visiting there and you're forced to lawfully use your firearm in self-defense, then we provide you with all the member services. And
Sean, we've gone really long here, but this was important because we got so many people that are going to now start carrying. I'm getting a lot of questions about this. So hopefully this will help answer a lot of those questions. If you're watching, I do suggest you give Second Call Defense a hard look. I've been saying that since long before they decided to sponsor the channel, and I've been a member since long before. So it's not driven by the fact that they're sponsoring the channel. Although, Sean, I'm very grateful for that, just so that you know, because it does help me keep this going. But I do suggest you give them a hard look, because they're a great company, a great organization, and you've just learned a lot of the reasons why. Sean, we need to wrap up, but is there anything else we didn't talk about that we should talk about?
Not that I can think of really, but wait till tomorrow morning. There'll be something else. It always happens that way.
Might happen this afternoon. You never know. Thank you very much for joining me. Have a great week, and I really do appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for watching the interview all the way through. I realize these things are long, but the information, particularly now with all the craziness going on where the Second Amendment is concerned, is incredibly valuable. And so it's important that we get it to you in some fashion. And as I say, I realize these are long, and, YouTube likes really short videos and like that. So thank you very much for keeping an eye on it as long as you did. If for some reason you feel that this video might go away again, you'll find it at these other places. I am steering people toward Rumble because it seems to be the most popular, although a lot of folks are going to BitChute as well, which I always have to say carefully. And then lastly, if you would like to support GunGuyTV and help me keep this thing going, I'm certainly not going to say no. Please join GunGuyTV Crew. You can do that at GunGuyTVCrew.com, or if you're already on Locals or you're already on Patreon, you can support and join GunGuyTV Crew on either of those locations. That's where I post a lot of exclusive content you can't find anywhere else. Thank you again for all of your support. Thank you again for being a staunch fighter for the Constitution and the Second Amendment. And wherever you go, whatever you do, stay safe.